What's the first thing you remember? For me, it's age 3, sidewalk. Pink wad have already been chewed bubblegum.
Ugh.
I picked it up, stuck it in my mouth, and discovered it still had flavor.
Disgusting!
That nasty little synthetic burst is ground zero for my conscious memory. Everything before it, just void. 53 years later, that disgusting pink taste can still teleport me right back to that exact spot, like some cheap trauma trigger. We like to romanticize involuntary memory as this beautiful gift. Proust and Ruiz are here to remind you it can also be a vicious bastard. Sometimes the memory doesn't return, it returns with receipts. For 18 years, I had zero memory that my father was the leader of an Indian scout troop my brother and I were in. Then, one random day, it all slammed back to me, permanently welded to the humiliating realization that I'd forgotten my own dad was there, or even that I was an Indian scout. The forgetting is now part of the memory. In fact, I only remember it now as something I once forgot. Neat! Speaking of stubborn memory, I've got my own little Proustian defect. For years, I only knew the book as Remembrance of Things Past. Even though the current translation, In Search of Lost Time, is a better title, my brain refuses to update the damn file. One title feels soft and wistful, the other feels desperate. And it's the same damn book. Pulling lost chunks of your life out of the dark and realizing your past is full of these gaping holes. Yeah, that's the whole damn movie. Time Regained. But it's not a film you can casually consume while checking your phone. If you're looking for a standard plot-driven story, you will be lost before the first scene ends. Raúl Ruiz abandoned traditional literary structure to create something closer to a sweeping fresco. It demands that you stop looking for the what and start looking for the when. I'm Eric Trometer.
I'm Erin Brown.
I'm Sila Blume.
I'm Jennifer Trujillo.
I'm Koom Kangason.
And this is World Cinema History. So here's a quick cheat sheet for Time Regained, so the characters don't just wash over you like a tide. Marcel, played by Marcello Massarelli, our eyes and ears, trying to stitch life together from fragments. Baron de Charlus, the heart of the decadence, an aristocratic aesthete whose antisocial habits and pro-German sympathies during World War I define the ongoing collapse. Robert de Saint-Loup, Uncle Gregory, Marcel's best friend and Charlus' nephew. He and his uncle are locked in a subconscious rivalry for the same man. Chalet Morel, Vincent Perez, the violinist and the object of desire for both Charlus and Saint-Loup. Odette de Cresset, Catherine Deneuve, the widow of Swann, a former courtesan who haunts the film. Gilbert de Saint-Loup, Emmanuel Bayard, Robert's wife and the daughter of Odette and Swann. Albertine, Chiara Mastroianni, the center of Marcel's obsession. In the novel, the narrator essentially kept her as a prisoner out of extreme jealousy. She died earlier in the story, which is why she only appears as a haunting flashback here. Ruiz never explains this, so she functions as pure memory. Madame Verdun, Marie Frances Pizer, a key society figure whose decline marks the fall of the aristocracy. Important thematic traits to watch: the lesbian relationships of Odette, Leah, and Albertine represent Swann and the narrator's painful exclusion from the true object of their desire. In contrast, the increasingly open homosexual affairs of Charlus and Saint-Loup are portrayed as symptoms of aristocratic decadence and decline. Remember, these people aren't moving through a plot. They are figures in a fresco. Watch how the Baron and his nephew circle each other through Morel. It's the decay of a bloodline. Now, the easy way out would be to force this conversation into a simple, comfortable pop culture reference. Things we all know and things that will make this feel more modern and relatable. But Harold Pinter, who wrote the screenplay we're going to be contrasting to Time Regained, knew that urge to simplify is just another part of the Wittgensteinian language game we discussed last week in the trial. It's a power play to make Proust or Ruiz behave the way we want them to, instead of doing the hard work of meeting them on their own terms. We don't take the easy route here on World Cinema History. Kuntang Jason, you're a novelist, and you also took a European film course under the eminent critic Robin Wood. How does the way Ruiz handles this transition compare to how you would bridge a gap in your own work, keeping in mind that he is only adapting the last volume of a 4,300-page novel?
I did join the cast for a discussion very, very late this time, so I didn't even have a chance to rewatch the film. I watched maybe an hour of it, but very late at night last night, and my mind was on other things, and I, as a person who have not read Proust, was completely adrift and had no clue what was going on, and I could only watch about an hour and a bit of it before giving up, which is too bad because I do think the film has merit, and I remember watching it in the theater decades ago and generally liking it. It was kind of oddly disappointing to be completely adrift, and since I don't know Proust, which I think this film requires you to be knowledgeable about in terms of his work, I feel like watching the film without that understanding is a baffling affair at best. I studied with Robin Wood towards the very end of his career, and I was still pretty young. I was in my 20s doing my master's. I knew about his stature, but I hadn't really either seen all of the films that he extensively wrote about, nor did I really have a strong understanding of what he'd written himself, except, a general outline. And so I took what was a European cinema course, but it focused on fairly contemporary films from about 20 years ago. He was quite enamored of Michel Haneke, so we watched a strong contingent of those films. He really liked Claire Denis. And those all seemed very understated films to me, especially in comparison with the films I loved like Bergman and, Hitchcock and all of that good stuff that he'd written about decades before. Not only that, but he was sort of towards the end of his career, towards the end of his life. He was on the fringes of the department at what was not the most prestigious university in Toronto, but sort of like, the safety school or the backup school that students went to. And cinema academia had kind of been taken over, kind of like by politics that had left him behind. We definitely got along, because I realized even back then that I was not really a true academic, but I was one of these people who were cast in the model of the older academics who were basically like reviewers who just looked at things in strong detail but talked about what they liked. I realized that Robin Wood was exemplary at that, and I was more in that vein, so I was definitely not bound for a PhD or anything like that. But we generally got along. If it's of interest, I'll say that at the end of the grad seminar, he had our class, and there weren't many of us because it was a grad seminar, over to his place. I mean, he certainly wasn't a rich man or anything, and he showed the umbrellas of Cherbourg. So that kind of gives you a sense of how maybe sentimental he'd become by that point.
He must have mellowed a lot since his writing career.
Big time, I think. You might remember the story I told when we did The Passion of Anna, where he kind of cautioned me against getting too much into Bergman, where I was very much riding the tide of the despair and the grief and the intensity of the Bergman films. That gives you a sense of like the different places we were in terms of life. And I just thought it was kind of sad that he'd been kind of pushed to the margins by these newer scholars who had their political ground to carve out, which I had no interest in. So I'm not the best to kind of relay anything except that I have fond, pleasant memories of him, and I saw him, towards the end. In terms of adapting literature, I have this somewhat unpopular notion that we really shouldn't do adaptations because it kind of becomes a substitute for reading the book. Kind of like I feel like we're, reading the Cliff Notes when we're supposed to write an essay for English class instead of actually reading the material that we're supposed to genuinely digest and think about and then have an opinion on. There was a time when they used to do novelizations of movies just because people used to read more, so maybe they couldn't go see the movie because media wasn't so accessible, so they would buy the novelization of the book or whatever and read that instead. But we don't do that anymore because it's kind of silly. It makes no sense to transpose one medium from the other, and so I don't really see the reason to go the other way except that Hollywood or film producers seem bereft of original ideas, and so if something is important or it's sold, they're hoping to leverage the cachet of that or the importance. It's kind of like a pre-influencer kind of thing where we'll take the influential aspect of this and then we'll use that as part of the marketing to get this film made. The main problem with that is that the virtue of reading a book is the interiority. You really understand the inside feelings of characters. You can't describe everything like you can film. A person like Ruiz in this film has paid so much attention to what people are wearing and the decor and the staging and so on. I haven't read Proust, but I'm certain he can't have paid as much attention to that. And of course, it's a much more... Mm-hmm. Sorry?
More. Sentences go on for pages and pages and pages just describing a mustache.
Oh, okay. So I'm guessing it's in a different way, and maybe I'm just talking about general novels and adaptations, so I could be totally, once again, just out of my depth.
But I actually think that was the element Ruiz got right, was visualizing Proust's language in this.
When I do like adaptations, it's when the filmmaker really filters it through their own sensibility and sort of make it their own. So some good examples are, The Exorcist, for example, which is much more expressive of Friedkin than it is of the source material. Or, Coppola, The Godfather, especially Apocalypse Now is a wonderful example of really, making the source material your own. Or Scorsese with Raging Bull or Goodfellas. He does something with the source material, the nonfiction material, the books that really kind of get across what he's trying to say and convey.
I don't want to contradict Kuhn. I just want to offer my different angle on specifically adaptation. I will give the example of a piece that I learned to deeply love, partly because I think the piece is very, very good, and in part because the interpreter, in this case, through whom I learned of the piece, is a big love of mine, and that is Wild is the Wind by David Bowie, or interpreted by David Bowie. Somebody else wrote the piece, which is not very common for David Bowie. He usually writes his own material. For many years, I was very much into this piece, Wild is the Wind. Everything about this piece, the way none other but David Bowie is able to portray it with his voice and his everything he is, and instrumentation. And as I was doing some research, for some reason, I don't know why, I found out that several other people, including Barbra Streisand, I think, did it, which I found very bad. And that's how I discovered the version of Nina Simone. She does it very different and very good. I don't know how the composer or composers of the piece would react to these two versions. But for me, there are two very, very different pieces. One is very jazzy, the other one is David Bowie-ish. I don't disagree with the problem of interpretation or adaptation, which to me somewhat the same word, adaptation and interpretation. And especially in music, with the exception of a person like Kai Hosru, who was a composer in the earlier part of the last century, at some point he decided he did not want to allow anybody to play his pieces. And these piano pieces, for the most part, piano pieces are sometimes 8 hours long. I understand his situation and I understand what Kumi is saying, but at the same time, I think we need to separate the original piece and its soul and its meaning, and we need to give the artistic flexibility to whoever wants to adapt it. And we see that even in piano pieces who are usually very straightforward. Nevertheless, Glenn Gould, Martha Argerich, and Horowitz will all play it very differently. I know that Chopin or Liszt or anybody else would probably get up and say, that's not the way it's supposed to go. But I think the artist, when I read a book, it doesn't matter which book that may be, a classical or an experimental one, never am I reading what Camus wrote. Never am I really reading what Proust wrote. I'm always reading what I am reading from that book, how I interpret it, how I see it, how I see the colors, how I see the smells, how I see everything in the story. It's mine. It is, and I might shock the writer by telling that writer how I perceive that book. And that might be very different, but that's mine. In this particular piece, I obviously, I have not read that book. I wish I could have, but I give a lot of credit to this interpretation or to this adaptation because I see an incredibly high volume of power in what I perceive in the film as opposed to what I would perceive by reading the book. With some exceptions, of course, there are some bad adaptations, which is also speculative. I was very, very impressed with this film, not in connection with what Marcel Proust wanted, but with what I read from the film, the way this particular person, and let's not forget, the way any of these individuals, including Malkovich or Catherine Deneuve, the way they portray these roles might be extremely different to the way other actors will portray it. I mean, we all know that. I just want to show my appreciation for this particular piece, and I would finish with saying, I am looking at this piece. I'm looking at this possibility of expression, and I am not looking at an adaptation because I don't know the book, and for that reason, I cannot see an adaptation.
And it is an incredibly beautiful film to watch. But as I warned, it is not a film you can watch casually because so much of the nuance is visual. And what I think Ruiz did very, very well was to take the notoriously purple prose, that's a literary snob phrase, and I hate it, but that's what they labeled Proust with, and put it on screen visually as opposed to having it just overwhelmed with narration. There is some narration in this, and it is very Proustian, but it's just to give you the flavor. Where you get Proust and where this succeeds as an adaptation of Proust is in the visual style, the almost surrealistic movement of the camera and the sets, and the way time elapses through here is very much in what the novel did. But again, he's only adapting the last volume. So I'm going to go to Aaron. Did you have a hard time understanding who these people were and why why they were interconnected with each other without having had the previous almost 4,000 pages to set them up as people.
Yeah, I had no idea who anybody was or how they were related to each other or why they were there. I had a little trouble telling people apart sometimes, but I do that anyway. Unless I've seen something a bunch of times, sometimes I'll have trouble telling what actor is who if I don't know who the actor is already. So basically, there was John Malkovich. He was obvious. Didn't know who anybody else was. I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know why they were doing anything that they were doing. Yeah, it felt like there's so much backstory that wasn't there. And I feel like if you're going to do an adaptation, you need to tell the complete story that you're trying to tell so that it's not confusing for someone who just drops in and watches it, you know? And I've read the Pinter screenplay, and you were right, it was really good. I liked it a lot better than this film because I actually could tell what was happening.
Well, and it's an adaptation of the entire Oliver Shaded Heavens Purdue. It's not just Time Regained. So by the time you get to the Time Regained section in Pinter, you have a history with Odette.
Yeah.
That dates back to when he was a child that you don't get here.
With this, I mean, Odette was there and people didn't like her and you never really knew why. But I felt like you were supposed to know why, and I just didn't catch on. It was visually a very appealing movie, and I liked listening to people speak French because it's been so long since I've spoken it. I like hearing it and seeing how much of it I actually can understand without the subtitles. And that's basically the entirety of what I enjoyed about it.
What do you think you took away having read the screenplay before watching the film? What connections could you, Aaron, or you, Eric, give to us or our audience, I guess, is my question.
I saw the movie before I read the screenplay, so I was completely lost watching the movie, but then reading the screenplay, I'm like, oh, that's what that was supposed to mean. That's why that was important. Like, while I was watching the movie, I kept having to go to Wikipedia to try to understand what I had just seen in each scene. It wasn't clear to me from the movie that Albertine actually was interested in women, because in the movie that I watched, she said she was pretending just to mess with the other girl, and it's like, that's kind of shitty.
Which is a direct quote from the novel, but it's taken as the entire context of the relationship, and it's not shown that she's lying.
Exactly. In the screenplay, you know it's not true. You know that she's just saying that. And you know that Marcel knows, and that's why he breaks the cup. In the movie, it just didn't make any sense. You didn't know why Albertine was even there. You didn't know why
or
anybody
that she was being
there.
Kept prisoner by him during that scene.
Yeah.
It was an interesting approach that he took, but I do think there were some benefits to just sticking with Time Regained, and I'll get to that when we get to talk about the Pinter screenplay. Again, there is a lot you have to just kind of concentrate on for this film to really work, and I wonder if one of the reasons why I remembered it so much more fondly than my recent reaction to it was because watching it at the theater, it had 100% of my concentration. It was in surround sound, and those beautiful images were on that huge screen, and so I didn't have time to think about anything else. I couldn't turn my head away from it, and so I was able to process that information better.
I can 100% see why being in the cinema and immersed made a difference. So I struggled trying to watch this originally when I was tired, like super tired, and was nodding out, to be honest. And then finally was able to, I made it through the first 30 minutes, 4 times, which is crazy. I started at the beginning again earlier today and stayed focused through the whole thing. But it took effort to be there, and I understood. Even, I asked someone else to watch it, and they're like, I can't stay focused. And I was like, yeah, you got to work at it. I thought it was dreamy and fluid. I could imagine it being gorgeous on a big screen and with surround sound. I really liked the arid floating nature of the memories and the way it leaned into what Sila always says, that does time exist? Or some other friends of my life always talk about the past, present, and the future are all happening at the same time in the same place. And it's really just a matter of slipping from one to the other. And they pull this off with this film. I loved the actor that played the child version of him. I have no idea if the kid understood what he was doing or how old that actor was, but he was impish and smiling a lot, whether he was knowing or not knowing or just enjoying the moment. And he was enjoyable for me. And to watch him come in and out in parallel with the older version of him made him a more likable character overall for me. I saw the queerness sort of threaded through it, and I found that interesting and amusing. I don't know enough about it. Watching this film, like many of the films we've experienced, right? Imagining watching them like you, Eric, at a different time and then revisiting them. Many, many films change as I change, as I age, as my perceptions change. Like Goodfellas for me, I rewatched it after we watched stuff, and that changed for me and how I felt about it from having seen it the first time. I thought this film was visually lush and pretty and interesting. I think the plot, I sort of let it go that I was just supposed to float through and experience it like the characters were floating through. So I sort of let that go. And I hoped that our conversation and your notes and discussion would tie some stuff together with me, and that perhaps if I find time, I'll read the Pinter's thing and it'll start, the Lego pieces will start to fall into place of where it lands. But overall, once I could focus on it and sit through it, it was doable in a pleasurable way. It was 2 hours and 43 minutes, but plus another 2 hours of watching the first 30 minutes. So well spent in that it was interesting. And I'm curious to hear what else there is to learn about it. And I have appreciated everybody's thoughts so far. And I appreciate the fact that all of us come together and try to talk about things the best we can from where we are. That's kind of the magic of this podcast. So I appreciate that.
I'm not saying that I think it's a bad adaptation or it shouldn't be adapted. Just that's my general feeling about adaptations, because novels do very different things than films. So like Sila was talking about music is written to be played. So it's natural for its medium for different interpretations and arrangements, just like a play is written to be performed. So that makes sense, just like a screenplay is written to be filmed. But a book is written to be read. Although obviously there are a lot of writers nowadays who write hoping that a film will be made so that it will gain them fame and money. I think we're all agreeing to some degree that the filmmaking is great, and I agree with that too. And I think the central conceit of having Marcel in bed as an old person, and then either light coming through the walls or walls sliding away, or this kind of interiority, this kind of memory slash almost dream kind of confluence there is a fantastic, filmic way to try to represent that. I was trying to think about, just bridging on what everybody said, why did I like this decades ago? And I think they're in agreement there that seeing it as a film, and keep in mind, a celluloid film in the late 90s, which had like glorious reds. And I remember I would go to the cinema and just be enthralled. And so I think, like Jennifer said, you're just kind of like swept along. The actual experience of that was just so ravishing that I enjoyed it. It's interesting that Eric's first memory is of, being a kid and picking up this gum off the sidewalk. My earliest memories are not actually things happening, but sort of almost like images. So I think I'm just prone imagistically. I'm drawn that way. So I don't have a good memory for smells, but I do for images. And I guess this film must have worked its magic on me. But I also think 2.5 decades ago that we could have these kinds of experiences where, like Eric said, we're just kind of wrapped up and enthralled in film. But now, due to almost a kind of ADHD effect, diffraction of our attention and our consciousness makes it harder, even though films themselves have responded to that by using more fragmented editing and more, faster editing and more of a music video kind of aesthetics. I think what this film is doing is the opposite almost. It's asking you to pay very strong concentration to who these people and memories and fragments are, because you have to knit them together. And if you haven't read the material, good luck with that. The other thing I think is maybe like just when I was young, I was impressionable and I was in the thrall of discovering art cinema. And I just took it granted that this was high class art. And so I just went with it without knowing the source material or understanding it. Maybe that's what it is. And as a middle-aged man, I may not have that patience or innocence or just wide-eyed exuberance for all things film.
I mean, that's part of it, right? The first time you see something, the first time it hits you, it can be magic, right? Like those moments, just even a technique, like some of the things we've watched through this podcast, like seeing some of the things from historical context of like, okay, wow, that's the first time seeing that and experiencing that, whatever age you are, whatever level of experience you are in the film world is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, the moving camera and
Yeah.
the way the sets themselves move is wonderful. And I read the Wikipedia article on Ruiz, and he's very celebrated. I mean, his home country had a day of mourning when he died. He's made a ton of stuff.
Where's he from? I don't even know.
Is it Chile? Is that right, Eric?
I didn't read anything about him. I just watched the film.
It's Chile, yeah. After Pinochet came into power, he and his wife basically fled to France, and then they resided in France. But Chile had a day of mourning for when he died. This film made a fraction of what it cost to make in terms of like box office receipts, but it was obviously received very well, and so it's an important film to like at least attempt or engage with.
I struggled with parts of this film after having just finished reading the novel again.
Which you didn't do before, right?
Which I hadn't before. So I
Interesting.
think maybe there's something to what Kuhn was saying about maybe our attention spans and the amount of distractions that we have now. And our expectations from media have reshaped our brain. And how fucking Proustian is that?
And I watch certain things like, I watch hours and hours and hours and hours of things for the film festival. And those I try to put my blinders on and focus as much as I can and stare at the screen. And I do that with these things for the podcast as well, right? Like I have to look, I have to read. I'm looking at it because you're asking me as participating in this, which I love, in order to discuss it, to watch it fully. But there's other things I put on. I use the audio narration for the blind. I watch things with captions, but there's things I watch where I can crochet or knit or cook, or you know what I mean? I'm doing something else and still watching, which I think we do more and more and more of. Like people are constantly on their phones, on the metro, on everywhere. And I agree there's a difference in how things come across. And that's a really good point. The other point I wanted to bring up quickly is that I happened to be staying with some filmmakers, and I watched part of this, my homework for this, and we watched The Godfather, and they actually brought up the beauty of film and grain. They were like, could you imagine seeing this Godfather or this film? They both brought it up in the cinema on film. And I thought that was interesting that it came up again in this conversation, because it does change the digital aspects and the different levels of digital processing change films. So that even happened with a film for my film festival, that during this festival that I'm at in person, I got to see it on the big screen with the DCP and surround sound. It was different. It was a different experience, 100%.
Jennifer, I'm curious about your take on the women in Proust. Many critics, including friend of the show Jean Cocteau, historically viewed them as men in textual drag, but newer scholarship argues that their lesbianism is actually central to the novel's aesthetic rather than a simple stand-in for male homosexuality. Do you see the narrator's obsession with them, at least in this film adaptation that you watched, as an attempt to force them into his own conventions while they are simply living lives he cannot understand or map? After all, the novel is fiction. Proust may have been inspired by the men in his life, but he created fictional people. For instance, Octave, who doesn't appear in this movie but played a large part in the previous 2 volumes, was inspired by Jean Cocteau himself. But Octave is a womanizer, whereas Cocteau was quite the opposite. Are these women within the logic of the narrative simply real lesbians in real relationships of their own?
My best guess is that they're both, that they're all of those things, and they're also open to the eye of the interpreter. I have not reread Proust nor the Pinter screenplay, so I only took the lesbianism and the homosexuality and the bisexuality and the BDSM and the pansexuality that I saw in the film from my interpretation or my lens of those things.
And don't forget the mutual masturbation.
There was mutual masturbation. There was intense. I mean, the BDSM that was so intense that there was blood everywhere. He's like, not enough. I was like, okay, dude, not enough. Everybody had their own perception and take. Did see the homosexuality. I did see the lesbians. I felt like I saw jealousy across the board of anyone who was experiencing sexuality or having fun, whether it was jealousy or disdain coming across from some of the characters, or just the seed of gossip of some of the characters, right? Like it was just entertainment. But I felt that I could see the lesbianism. I do understand, which now I'm intrigued, and I don't think I've ever read that book. There's an entire book on Proust and lesbianism, which my apologies to anyone who has studied all of this through queer history. I have not, and it's a place I clearly need to go and spend more time. I mean, I knew Proust was someone who people debate his own homosexuality, including his estate, from what I can tell, that or himself, like he struggled with it as well as leaned into it. I'm not even sure if it's real. I read something that said there were more pieces that have now come out. I think that article was from like 2018 or 16 that said there's more books that.
Yeah, we have his diaries. And we have his letters to Jade, in which he basically goes into great detail about 3 of his affairs now.
Professing love and lust, right?
It
Both
is,
love and
he
lust.
goes into very carnal detail.
So lust and maybe love.
Who knows?
Lust.
Who knows?
Who knows?
But he had sex with many men, like many men.
It seems that way, and it seems like he had sex even from the movie. Like these men had sex with one man thinking of another, or multiple men together. I mean, there was a whole length of period with the brothels and the different type of men and what everybody wants. So I'm not shocked to hear, right, confirmation of his homosexuality.
Let's move off of that, because
Okay.
that's an old argument. We
So
now
what's the
know,
new take I should take?
Let's get back to Elizabeth Ladinson and
Okay.
Proust lesbianism.
I haven't read it. What do you know about it? What can you tell me?
Well, I haven't read it either. I've only read the summary of it. Her thesis, if the summaries are correct, is that the lesbianism of these women is the driving plot narrative. It's what drives Swan insane in the early chapters, and it is what drives the narrator, who is called Marcel in this film, but is never called Marcel in the actual novel. His Christian name is never given. Insane in the later volumes, and that their bearing as lesbians was important to Proust, that this wasn't an idea of him having an affair with a man and being angry that they were still interested in women, that it was the actual inability of these men who could contemplate having sex with other men to contemplate women having sex with other women that was driving them crazy, because it seemed something that was out of their control, and it was a form of jealousy that they could not put into any context, because they could not even imagine 2 women being together.
To that point of the women having the dynamic, being in charge of the dynamic, that is the argument that is put by some for the trial, that the women are the ones pushing everything. Not because it's their fault, but they're the ones actually calling the shots.
It is rather interesting that Kafka had kind of a lower opinion of women than Proust obviously did. I think we are making this novel sound a lot more sexual than it is, because if you're coming to Proust looking for a thrill, you're going to be bored to
Thank you.
tears.
Thank you. Of course, we're not here to discuss the meaning, the semantics of adaptation and based on and things like that. But I think that adaptation has nothing ever to do with purity. That's why, for me, the word adaptation means exactly that. It's not pure. Not only because the content cannot be transferred into another medium one to one, but because every art form has its own abilities and disabilities. I am mostly impressed, and I think the book would tell me the same thing. I'm mostly impressed by the focus on the juxtaposition of time, if there's such a thing. It's actually not really, but, and I want to read a quote from the movie. If memory, thanks to the act of forgetting, offers no bridge from itself to the present, it allows us to breathe a new air. New because we have breathed it before. Poets tried vainly to situate this air in paradise, but true paradises are those we have lost. What I got for the most part from this film, or from the idea, is this creative form of addressing what memory is in comparison to what the present is. And I find that a lot more attractive than to speak of gender orientation. And not that I'm against it, but I found in this film the masterful display of how we are victims of knowing or not knowing that whatever we do today is only being done in a very strong reference to the past.
Can everybody talk about how they believe time works, or like in their experience or for themselves? It could be tied to memory, but just time itself, without getting too in the weeds. Like, film is kind of interesting too in terms of the way it works in terms of time, because we all watch it in a similar way or in a similar time frame, unlike, say, a painting where you can look in different directions and orientations and for different durations or from different angles. Or like even when you read a book, I often find myself rereading lines or sometimes flipping back to connect things. What are your beliefs about time?
Memory is chemical and time is eternal. Memory is simply the mixing of chemicals in your brain, thus corruptible, but time exists outside of memory. Time existed before the earth, and it will exist long after. Time existed before the universe, and it will exist long after. To say, I understand time is like explaining what green tastes like. You can't, because it's apples and oranges. You just can't.
Although oranges are not green.
They start out green. They turn orange later, but yeah,
But they're not very good when they're green.
No, not really.
For Mexicans, perhaps.
It sounds, Eric, like that you don't believe in that Einsteinian notion where it's just all relative.
Well, yeah. Explain to me, okay, the universe is expanding into nothing, but what is nothing? And then you try to explain the idea that it's a balloon expanding into a room. A room has substance, so there is substance. It's not nothing. It's just we don't know what it is, and we use the word nothing to explain it. So I guess I have a more Wittgenstein view of time, because words limit our ability to describe it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
When I said I don't believe in time, for me to talk about time is like to talk about God or to talk about love. I believe nobody, I don't know what time is. I see it as a measuring thing that we use, which makes sense. For example, the the seasons when the new year comes. Now we know we have experienced 365 or 66 days. I don't believe that anybody knows, not even Stephen Hawking. We don't know what time is. We are referring to something and we name it time because we are looking at this, and that's how we, just like the color green, when we both look at the traffic light, we are both, or 10 of us are looking at different hues and different colors possibly, but we have all been conditioned to call it green. So we agree on the terminology, but we're not saying the same thing. And for that reason, I choose not to talk about time, and I choose not to talk about God, because I think nobody knows what God is, nobody knows what love is, and nobody knows what life is. We are experiencing what we experience. That's it. The time in this film is of importance because he is telling a story, or what we could call a story, in a very different chronological order. And as a result, we are observing something that is transpiring in a very different sequence than we're used to. So it's a different way of addressing what we call time.
Basically, I agree that it's how you perceive it is what matters with time. Like they said in the film, it's the memory that makes the event have any kind of meaning. So in the moment, do you enjoy it? Maybe, maybe not. Not really. You enjoy it after the fact. You realize after the fact that it was something that you enjoyed. And it's like Christmas Eve is better than Christmas morning because you're anticipating opening the presents and having all the good times with your family. It's all about perception. I had a boss in Tallahassee that he put it in an interesting way about life and time. It's like a roll of toilet paper. It goes faster as you get to the end. So that's my thoughts on time.
I do think time accelerates with age in a different way, or our perceptions of time.
Oh, that's only because we've lived so much more of it. So when you're young, 3 months what is a huge percentage of your life. When you're old, 3 months is a tiny percent.
Right, you're thinking of the perception of like even summer break or the holidays, or yeah,
Because
that's
we
true.
have repeated so many years, they go quicker because we have experienced a lot more in all kinds of contexts. And as a result, the year goes faster because we have already known what a year is.
Plus, how you're
And
spending the time changes it too. If you're busy and you're not paying attention to the clock, time seems to go so much faster than if you're bored out of your mind on a Friday afternoon waiting for it to be 5 o'clock.
No matter how you perceive that 5 minutes, that 5 minutes went by at the exact actual speed that it went by. The watch pot never boiling is not true. The pot
right,
comes to a boil at the same amount of time whether it's being observed or not.
the sun rises and sets and
No, no,
continues
no, no,
to.
no, 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 no,
Oh,
no,
wait,
no.
go Sila.
Okay, if you're in New York, it will boil at a very different speed than if you're in Quito,
Colorado.
Ecuador.
The observation of it doesn't change that.
Burnt
The
light.
amount of time it takes does not take a bit longer in New York or in Guatemala. That's based on atmospheric pressure, not based on whether you're observing it or not. It's still taking the exact same 8 minutes whether you're watching it boil or not.
I was just referring to the different timing when you boil here. And I burnt my rice, my first time cooking rice in Quito, for the same reason. I didn't know it was going that fast.
I do think time and memory are different things. I agree with all of that that was said. I think another thing that is incredibly true for me, that depending on when you learn it, many people learn it somewhere in life, and I did, that I am choosing to spend my time. I don't waste my time. And if I'm wasting my time, I am consciously making a choice to be doing what it is that someone else would perceive as me wasting my time. Like, I choose to spend my time here. I'm choosing to spend time watching the films that we do and talk about it. If I'm just sitting watching the sunset at the beach, I'm choosing that. And even with friends, like when you're young, there's this level of, I did feel like I wasted time because it felt like a more of an endless resource. But when you learn that life is so precious and so fleeting, and there is no guarantee of the next hour, nor the next day or the next year, in my perception, that has changed my conscious choice of choosing what I'm doing with the time. Now, I do have believings in that, what I said, that time is past, present, and future is happening all at the same time. I'm obsessed with the concept of time travel. I think we can do that in our own minds and imaginations. I don't know that I have an answer other than I know that I consciously choose what I'm doing with my time and it's of value. And I appreciate other people choosing the time that is interconnected in my life. I do believe in also what I think Eric said hugely: smell, music, food, movies. Like, right? You hear a song and I can be transported like time travel to a moment of time of who I was with, where I was with, the smell of food. And that's all connected, I think, to what you said, Eric, in the sense of chemicals and endorphins and how powerful that is. Um, Amazing. And even moving pictures, like they're starting to use VR in ways, I think, to help people with loss of time and dementia and Alzheimer's and other things. You can put VR and music and smells on, and that person suddenly has a cognition of a place and time and relationships in such a beautiful way that I think it's amazing. Like, that's instant time travel for me, like a song or a smell or other stuff. Also, just this weird concept of coming from a global perspective from my life of what I do with the film festival and other things, to be like, we joke about I'm in the past or I'm in the future or I'm whatever. And those are based on modern modern quote unquote recordings of times. And I even have people in that world who use the Western calendars, but they use Eastern and other calendars as well. People that exist on the Chinese lunar calendar, or people from Nepal or other places, have a different, they're watching multiple calendars and watching passage of time through a handful of different lenses. And I find that amazing and cool and fascinating.
I think they're experiencing the same thing, but they're measuring it as time differently. They're placing it, but we are experiencing, all the Chinese and us, we are experiencing the same thing. That's just my belief. But we are calling it based on a different measurement, the Chinese calendar or the other calendars.
It's fascinating to me to be literally on a visual call or talking in Zoom with someone who's in a northern part of Sweden and the sun doesn't even set. Someone else who's closer to the equator is at a different pace altogether of growth. Like, you've lived, maybe you haven't, but I've lived in places with less than 10 degrees from the equator, and the rate of growth of plants is accelerated. They're absolutely accelerated faster than they are.
Ecuador.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where I lived in Venezuela, we could cut a branch
because
off a
they're
tree.
exposed to more sunlight.
Sunlight, nutrients, all of those things, but sunlight and whatever. But I mean, a branch on a
they are experiencing time the same way, but they are perceiving time differently because in their amount of time they are exposed to sunlight more.
Yeah.
But the time is actually moving at the same rate. They simply grow faster because they are perceiving it differently because of their proximity to the sun.
But then you get the opposite, even in the solar extremes, where in Sweden they're not having extended growth. They have sunlight until 2. It doesn't never. There's days it never goes dark at all.
They're further from the sun, so they're actually, while they have longer days, getting actual less sunlight.
Well, sunlight, but at a different level of absorption.
They're further because they're actually further from the sun. The reason why the sun doesn't set is simply because the rotation of the Earth has them so far away from the sun that it never goes completely black.
Right.
So it's just their perception.
Anyways,
it's different. To bring it back to the movie, go ahead, Sila.
No, this is why I refer a lot more to action or activities than to time. What counts for me is the actions, what I'm doing. It doesn't, and for example, I never talk about wasting time, because whatever so-called time transpires, I am acting or not acting. Actually, I'm always acting. I cannot avoid acting. This for me is the key. Not how quickly I cook, but the cooking itself.
Yeah.
Speaking of the perception of time, to me, the first hour of this film felt longer than the second hour and 50 minutes.
I agree with that. It took me forever to get through the first 30 minutes.
Let's not forget the very, very interesting, at least from my perspective, the very interesting title, Time Regained. I find that is a very, very loaded title.
I don't know if I have any final thoughts except just hearing the fact that the last hour and 50 minutes isn't as difficult as the first hour made me regret not being able to watch the full film, because the first hour is what just kind of convinced me that I just wouldn't be able to do justice to it. It's been a really interesting, sprawling discussion about many things. I do think the film has merit. I'm just puzzled in that rewatching it was so different than the feeling I had of watching it 25 years or more.
It's that Madeline cookie all over again. Proust plants it on page 42, and it doesn't show up again until page 4018.
It was really like trying to find a Madeline cookie I savored and loved as a kid, and then finding out that the people producing the Madeline cookie now a totally different entity despite having the same name. They made it with different ingredients or made it in a different way, or simply that my own taste buds might have changed in the intervening years, or partly both. I don't know.
In Search of Lost Time, is that what you're referring to?
That's just a
Yeah, I'm
modern
coming back.
translation. Oliver
Yeah, but
Combs Purdue was In Search of Lost Time is the new translation. It was Remember to Things Past when I was growing up, and it
yeah.
literally means in the style of a research into my past. Finishing the novel with Time Regained, that double meaning in French to Proust was very meaningful because the title of the novel, In Search of Lost Time,
Well, yeah.
could also be
lost time.
in search. Yeah, could also mean in search of wasted time. Aaron, your final thoughts on Time Regained?
It felt very self-indulgent, like, hey, these are my memories, aren't they so important and cool? I know that's not what he was going for, but that's what it felt like. I agree that the first hour was like more of a slog than the rest of it, because by the time you got to the rest of it, you did have more of an idea who everybody was, but still, I was so lost. I'm not saying it was bad at all. I'm just saying it was not something that I enjoyed, and that's not something I'm ever going to watch again. I was just so confused.
If Marcel Proust would be still alive, I would probably suggest to him to call it Life Regained. I think that's more of what I see here in the juxtaposition of him talking into this younger him and having conversations and recollecting memories of what happened in connection with that, and that is this connection of actions of moments that we call time because they happen in different time sectors. But the main thing that I take from Aristippus, who is the one who came up with the idea of hedonism, is that pleasure is there not to get wasted, but to elevate the spirit. And in this film or in this idea, I see this ability to just connect, similar to the way I'm doing right now when I write and thinking about my father. The more I remember things and the more I try to remember things, the more I understand where I am today. And Life Regained or Time Regained for me is here very much having to do with his ability to recollect what has happened and regain that whatever happened by connecting whatever is now to whatever passed before. In the same way that I say, to find humor in something, you have to gain a distance to it so that when you have an accident years later or months later, you could say what happened to you, but you can laugh about it. But in that moment, you were not able to laugh about it. And in this case, I see that by thinking about the past and getting closer to the past by reimagining it, you are able to get a certain closeness to the past to recognize how great and serious most acts are.
And Jennifer, final thoughts on Time Regained?
I think it was beautiful and interesting and worth watching. I think it was great to hear everybody's perceptions on different views of it. I'm curious whether you all think I should now read the Pinter thing or not. Should I make that a priority? I guess that's up to me. I'll start it and see. But Aaron, based on your perception, do you think I should
Well,
read it?
why don't you listen to next week's episode and make your mind up then?
Oh, what a great idea, along with everybody else. Are you going to put a link to the Pinter thing somewhere or notes so other
Oh,
people
that's a
can?
great idea. I think I
Yeah,
will. Thank you, Jennifer.
yeah. So, folks, read it, watch it. Let me know what you think. Let your thoughts. Let us know your thoughts on time and other things. I mean, I love coming together and having these critical discussions and this opportunity, and I appreciate your inclusion, the folks here in this room with me, and everybody out there in allowing critical watching, analysis, dialysis, dissecting of films, and appreciation of me willing to say I have no idea or I don't remember, because that's what happens to me. So I thought it was cool and interesting and pretty, a worthwhile venture. And so thanks for letting me talk about it.
Join us next time as we take a look at Harold Pinter's attempt to adapt all of the Proust novel, all the Aristocratic attempts for two. Thanks again, and have a good one.